Images can serve many different purposes, from simple decoration to visuals of complex processes. Using them in your online learning content can be a great way to create visual representations of your subject matter. An important consideration when inserting images into your content is how you'll make them available to someone who is unable to see them. When provided with a text representation of an image, many people with sight impairments have the ability to visualize the graphic. A text representation of an image is another way to say an image's alternative text. Many text editors provide a place for you to replace an image with alternative text. The image will remain visible in your content, but the text representation will be available to those who need it the most. When it's time to write alternative text, simply think about the context of the image within your content. For example, consider this image of a beekeeper. 3 questions to consider are: am I using this image basically as decoration? Is the image a visual example of something I described thoroughly in the typed content? Do I intend for the image to provide additional information to supplement a point I made in the content? My approach to writing the alternative text will differ depending upon the context of how I use the image. Let's take a closer look at each of these situations. Here, the beekeeper image is just a decorative visual. I added it to the end of this document because I mentioned beekeeping as a hobby I'd like to explore. In this instance, the image doesn't need much. If the decorative image were removed, the quality of the content won't degrade, so the alternative text could simply be a couple of words to state what's in the image. I think beekeeper collecting wax from a hive will suffice. When a vision-impaired learner hears this alternative text, it will be clear that there's no important learning content to be gleaned from the image. Let's take a look at the images on this page. Leading up to these images, the topic has been an overview of precautions to take while beekeeping, and in the previous paragraph I talked about what should be worn for safety when working around the hives. These 2 images are examples of safety clothing. They are visual examples of something I described thoroughly in the previous content, so each of their alternative texts will represent an overview of what is seen in the pictures. For example, to address the first image, I could type beekeeper wearing a hat and veil, a one-piece long-sleeve jumpsuit, and plastic gloves. For the second image, I could type beekeeper wearing hat and screen, a one-piece long-sleeve jumpsuit, and plastic gloves. Let's see if we can apply what we've learned so far. Here I've displayed an image of Nikola Tesla near a list of a few of his inventions. Would this be considered a decorative image or an example image? To answer that, remember to think about the context of the image. In this case, if I removed the image of Mr. Tesla, the content would not suffer, so this is a decorative image. For its alternative text, I would type Nikola Tesla. Let's change the context so that the image is an example of one of Mr. Tesla's inventions. Because it is now an example, we'll type as our alternative text an overview of what's seen in the image: a Tesla coil expending electrical current. Finally, there may be times when you'll need an image to supplement your content. Its purpose will be to accompany a point made in the content and to provide additional information. Let's return to the image of the beekeeper collecting wax. Let's say that the topic of this lecture is a discussion on beehive management. I'm using this image because it helps students visualize a point I made about the number of beehives that can be economically viable in one location. The context of this image is neither a decoration nor an example. In this context, it is some of the content, so it will require a longer description so my students can learn what I intend for them to learn from it. The long description should be a part of the lecture content, so all of the students can benefit from it. So I'll type it near the image. Here's another example of an image requiring a long description because it is content. The image demonstrates the life cycle of a deer tick as it depends on the life cycle of the white-footed mouse, so I wrote a long description of the process under the image. Images that you've written a long description for will still need an alternative text. We'll treat the alternative text for this life cycle image as we would an example image. I'll type parasitic life cycle of the deer tick as it relies on the life cycle of the white-footed mouse. Deciding to use images is a great way to help students visualize your content. Alternative text is required for all images, and a long description should be provided when the context of the image requires it.